Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into the ideas from the book A Church in Revival. It really zeroes in on the very first church in Jerusalem to tackle a huge question. What happens when faith stops being just a weekly routine and becomes this all-consuming, world-changing force? Let's get into it.
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to define what the book even means by revival. Then we'll look at the two big prerequisites it talks about. After that, we'll get into the wild catalyst event, what life was actually like in the middle of it all, and finally, how this thing spread like wildfire.
Okay, first step. What is a revival, really? The book has a pretty specific take on this. It frames it less like something we build or create, and more like something that, well, just shows up.
So, according to the book, a revival is this season of God's visitation. It's an outpouring from heaven that lands on earth. The key word here is visitation. It's not something human-made. It's an external force that comes in and completely changes the spiritual weather, you know? It's not just a more energetic Sunday morning. It's like the entire atmosphere has been replaced with something else.
So if you can't make a revival happen, what can you do? Well, the book argues you can prepare the ground for it. It points to two specific things that had to be in place, two prerequisites that kind of set the stage for everything that was about to unfold.
And here they are. It's pretty straightforward. Number one, unity. A deep, genuine agreement in purpose and spirit. The book calls it being in one accord. And number two, constant prayer. Not just any prayer, but persistent collective prayer. And the author is really clear on this. These weren't just nice-to-haves. They were the absolute, non-negotiable foundation.
And the key thing to get here is that this wasn't like a one-off prayer meeting. No. The book emphasizes that this was a continuous state of being. They had to maintain this unity and this attitude of prayer while they were waiting. It was all about creating and holding a certain kind of spiritual atmosphere, one that was ready for whatever was coming next.
All right, now we get to the main event, the day of Pentecost. This is where things get really interesting, because the book dives into how this crazy, unexpected event was interpreted. This is where all that preparation meets reality.
So imagine the scene. There's chaos, the sound of a violent wind, people speaking in languages they've never learned. It's wild. And in the middle of all this confusion, the Apostle Peter stands up and explains everything with just 3 words. This is that. What he's doing is brilliant. He's taking the strange, confusing this that's happening right now and connecting it to the that of an ancient prophecy.
But here's the twist, and this is a huge point in the book. When you actually look at the prophecy, the that, it talked about things like people prophesying, dreaming dreams, and seeing visions. But what actually happened, the this, was a rushing wind, tongues of fire, and speaking in other languages. You see the problem? They don't match up, not literally anyway.
So from this strange mismatch, the author pulls out two pretty radical principles. First, the idea that God isn't limited by our interpretation of Scripture. The book puts it bluntly, he is bigger than the book. And second, and this is so important, it means that no two revivals will ever look exactly the same. You can't just create a formula from the past and expect it to work again.
And this leads to this core tension the book talks about, this balance between what it calls wisdom and revelation. Think of it like this. Wisdom is the right thing, the established, written truth. It's the old wineskin. It's sturdy, reliable. But revelation is the now thing. It's about seeing what God is doing right now. That's the new wine. And the argument is, if you try to pour the new wine into the old rigid wineskin, it's just going to break. You have to honor the past without being so stuck in it that you miss what's happening today.
Okay, so that's the theory, but what did it actually feel like to live in this? What was the day-to-day reality? Let's get practical, because the book paints a picture of a community that was just completely turned upside down.
Well, life was intense and totally unpredictable. I mean, look at this list. People's schedules were just thrown out the window. There was this radical sense of community and sharing. The church was growing at an explosive rate. Miracles were becoming common. But, and this is a big but, so was persecution from the authorities. There was swift judgment for sin inside the community, reports of angels, and yep, they still had to deal with internal problems. It was anything but simple.
To really get a sense of the scale here, you have to remember where it all started. It began with just this, 120 people. That was it, a small group huddled in an upper room, all in one accord, praying and just waiting.
And then, Pentecost happens. Peter gives one sermon, just one, and that core group of 120, it explodes. 3,000 people were added in a single day. Just think about that jump. The entire dynamic changed, literally, overnight.
And it wasn't a one-time thing. It kept happening. A little while later, there's a huge public miracle. A man who couldn't walk is healed. And what's the result? Another 5,000 people join. This makes it clear that the growth wasn't just about good preaching. It was being fueled by these undeniable powerful events.
But all of this power and growth had a flip side, and the book really hammers this point home. The miracles and the persecution were two sides of the exact same coin. The more potent and visible the power became, the more intense the opposition grew. You couldn't have one without the other. To choose the miracles was to choose the persecution that came with them. It was a package deal.
So this brings up a big question. With all this pressure, how did this intense local fire not just burn out? Well, here's the ultimate paradox the book explores. The very thing that was supposed to stamp it out, persecution, was actually the thing that made it spread.
And here's how. When these believers were scattered by persecution, they didn't just run and hide. They became, as the book calls them, revival carriers. The fire wasn't in a building in Jerusalem, it was in them. So when they were forced to leave, they took the fire with them, igniting new sparks in every city and region they went to. Persecution didn't put out the fire, it just scattered the embers.
So we're left with this really powerful idea. The book suggests that this kind of revival reshapes absolutely everything. It poses a question that's pretty challenging. What happens when your faith stops being something you do for an hour on a weekend and instead becomes a daily, all-encompassing reality that dictates every single part of your life? It's a shift from a belief system you manage to a force that manages you, for better or for worse.